Now I'd like to turn it over to Arya Halden. Arya uses she, her, hers pronouns, and she is currently serving as an AmeriCorps member with Campus Compact for New Hampshire. Welcome, Arya.
Hello, everybody. Again, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me today on a Thursday. I know this is our second to last day of the conference, but I appreciate you joining me in the space for this current session. And I'm excited to get started. So let's get right into it. So we did a little bit of introductions in a sense. You gave me a hometown and your adjectives, but now I'm hoping that we can do something together. So I did not come up with this idea on my own. I was looking for icebreakers that went beyond just the question in the chat box, and I came upon bingo. And I'm like, oh, that's going to be great. And I decided to make it more connected to our current situation. So we're all in this together bingo. So what it is, I'm going to go to the link here. So here's my playing card. I will zoom in so we can all see where I am looking. And so there's going to be a link dropped in the chat where you can play on your own computer. So I'm going to read through it in the order that I have, and then I'm going to have all of you kind of play through it, and let's see who gets bingo first in our group. Yeah, there is our link. So if you are able to access it, just give me kind of like a thumbs up or an emoji thumbs up from one of our reactions, and then we can get started. Okay. I'm looking through. Okay, looks like people are finding the link, hopefully loading it in. You got to spawn your card, but once it's there, it should be good to go. All right, so we're going to read in this order. We're going to go across the bingo. We're going to go left to right. So in this time of COVID-19, a lot of things have probably brought us together more than we wanted them to. And I know that since we are on Zoom, I think the most fitting way to start this is, have you ever said you're muted? You have, you can kind of click that off. And if you click on it, it should exit off from your card. Also, if you have any tech difficulties on your end, don't be afraid to tell us in the chat and we will work with you on that. Next one. So if you have ever ordered food or groceries online, I know I definitely did this, especially earlier on in the pandemic when just did not feel like going out. It just did not want to happen for me. All right. What about try not to make eye contact with someone not wearing a mask? Have you ever been in a store and like you notice someone not wearing a mask and you were just like, okay, if I don't look at them, they won't look at me, kind of like Jurassic Park? I've definitely done that. A lot of these are things that I either found or kind of made my own to make it more unique to our group. So let me know. All right. Went on a long, meaningful walk, something to kind of get you off of the Zoom world, off of technology, and back into our own internal thoughts. What about finished an entire TV or film series? Have you done that? I have done more than I would like to admit of finishing a lot of different things. What about
Arya? We have a bingo in the chat.
We do. Oh my gosh. Congratulations. Whoa, let's see. Congratulations, Elliot. Awesome. Yeah, we have a bingo. Okay, let's see if we can get one more. I'll speed through this. Googled information about a COVID strain or vaccine, especially now more than ever. Maybe cursed at a news channel or website. It's like frazzle, because of what they've been reporting. Took a video call from bed. I've definitely done that. Signed a document virtually. DocuSign has been my friend throughout this. Looked disapprovingly at a video of a crowded party. I have definitely just kind of given that a second glance once or twice. Struggled to maintain 6 feet, but it wasn't your fault. Maybe someone was really close to you in line, or maybe someone just was not acknowledging that there were people around them. What about started a new hobby? Or maybe work from home. That's our center square. That's what I'm assuming a vast majority of us have done at least one point during this pandemic. Wore pajamas for a full day. I'm guilty of doing that, not now, of course, but guilty. Child or pet interrupted your video call. Those are sometimes fun. It's nice to see what other people are up to in their daily lives. Or saw an ad for an impractical COVID product. Like, who needs a mask that can also play music? I mean, it's cool, but little pricey. What about saw high budget ad thanking essential workers? I see this for Amazon all the time. And my mom used to work in the Amazon warehouse and they never got Prime. So I'm like, you can pay for the ad, but you can't pay for your workers to have Prime. Something's not adding up there. Oh, do we have another? Oh, yes. We have Marlena, another bingo. Congratulations, Elliot and Marlena. And of course, we're all winners in this because we're all in this together. So hopefully, if you want, you can take this bingo presentation with you. I will definitely drop it in the chat later. And hopefully you can play that either with friends or family or at your own get-togethers. I think it's very fun. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and we will get into our scheduled programming. So this is about selfhood and service. So if you're in the right place, welcome. If you just stumbled in, welcome again. I am going to talk about how our identities impact our service, impact our communities, and more importantly, how those two things work together to make strong volunteers. So first, I want to say hello, nice to meet you. My name is Arya Halden. The finger spelling is very fast. Yes, I do know ASL, but I'm not going to sign the whole time because it would take forever. But Nile is signing for you, so we'll learn some things together. Nice to meet you. Who am I? I am not just a random person on this call. I am clearly the one speaking for a good chunk of it. So let's talk about it. So my name is Arya Halden. As was mentioned by Elisa, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I work for Campus Compact in Hampshire as an AmeriCorps member focusing on COVID-19 and recovery. So I work with our partner institutions on getting them COVID resources. I graduated last year from Florida State University with a Bachelor's of Science in Anthropology. And with that came a lot of teaching, research, and presentation experience on both visible and invisible identities. And we're going to get into what those terms mean and how they apply to us today. So within some of those research experiments and projects, I've worked within the LGBTQIA+ community and how they view allyship, as well as working on dating apps and how that world is traversed through the LGBTQIA lens. I've also worked on the experiences of ethnic minority single mothers in Vietnam and how that impact of being a single mother impacts their access to education. Lastly, my senior thesis was on Haitian and Jamaican students and their experience in the higher US education system, specifically at Florida State. I chose that because I am a Jamaican American. So I want to see how other students from my background were traversing higher ed, especially first generation, not only students, but first generation Americans. So that's a little bit about me and some of the perspectives I bring to the identity conversation I hope we are going to have today. Moving forward, I do have a few session goals. So of course, by the end of this session, I really hope that we can all learn together, mainly how to define commonly used and misconstrued terminology on visible and invisible identities. We're going to break it down more. Then we're going to continue the conversation on inclusion, diversity, and equity, and looking at that from a community lens and a service perspective. Last but not least, we will discuss how one's identity shape how a community could interact with them or perceive that individual. So that will be our overall session goals. But before we do that, I do want to talk about our conversational conventions. And also during this time, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. I will be notified by our lovely co-hosts, and they will let me know if I am missing anything that I'm not currently seeing on my screen. So another ASL word. So we have respect. It can be done, this is in our hand. It can be done with one hand, like our presenter is doing there below, or it could be done with two. So with respect, we're going to maintain respect for everyone's opinion in this space. People may differ given our perspectives and lived experiences, and we're going to respect those opinions as long as, of course, we feel like ours are being respected as well. So I hope that mutual connection could be had when we go through our discussions and our breakout sessions, that we can maintain that respect. Also being mindful of our mute button. Hopefully, if you do want to say something, you can always raise your hand and you can unmute yourself when you are, I don't want to say called on, but when I see that someone has raised their hand, we will definitely have that. Also making sure that If you are doing something, that you're muting yourself so that that background distraction won't be too much for the other participants here. Contribute as much as you feel comfortable to an activity or discussion. I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. I don't feel like you have to. For example, even bingo, if you don't feel like you want to play bingo, maybe you're all bingoed out, there's no need. You can just relax, sit back, but I still hope that you're engaged and I still hope that you're listening. Another thing is don't be afraid to ask questions or ask for clarification. We're going to go through a lot of different details and a lot of different identities that sometimes could be confusing. So please let me know if we ever need to do something with that information. And also, this is a breathing slide, meaning that things could be modified throughout this conversation, things could be changed, so don't be afraid to do that. I hope to learn as much as I can from all of you, as much as I hope you're hoping to learn from me. So we will continue onward. There we go. So what we're going to discuss. First, we're going to go into investigating identity, or we'll go into what that means later. Then solidifying selfhood. So we're starting from internal, going out. Then we will be going to syncing that into your service. So our internal and how that impacts our external environment. And of course, questions and discussion that will be integral. So investigating identity. So first, as I mentioned before, I talked about visible and invisible identities. So what are these differences? What makes an identity visible or invisible? Please feel free to drop it in the chat if you have any ideas. Hopefully this picture can maybe help with that a little bit, but I would love to know some perspectives. Also, can you all see my chat? Because I have it open. So just making sure. I'll give it a few seconds and then we can always move on. But essentially with visible and invisible identities, what I mean by this are, of course, we have our visible identities. So for example, if someone were to look at me, they can most likely tell my gender. They can most likely tell my race. And if they were to hear me speak, they would probably hear an American or Canadian accent, depending on where you are in Canada. So they can probably tell my nationality, or at least where I spent a good chunk of my life in a certain place. So with those visible identities, those are things that people can perceive and see from you in either a first instance or in an interaction with you. Then we have our invisible identities. So I like this iceberg model we have here because there are many things that we can't always visibly see on people. For example, life experiences. We can't always see the languages that people speak unless they're speaking them, the educational levels that they have, the skills that they have, the beliefs that they hold. And certain things are interchangeable. Maybe you can perceive someone's wealth based on what they're wearing or the items that they may have, or maybe you can perceive someone's religion based on what they're wearing. But for a vast majority of different identities, they tend to be invisible, especially if someone does not know what that specific thing is. Like if I were to wear a hijab and someone didn't know that a hijab is typically worn by Muslim women, then that may not be something that would be visible to them because they didn't know that it was a symbol or an item for that religion, Islam. So going in, I tried clicking a button and it didn't do anything. So we're going into, we're going to break it down further. We're going to go define, debunk, dissect, and intersectionality. So let's go and get into it. Define. So we're going to define some of these different identities. We have many different identities. A lot of them I'm going to talk about are going to be social, religious, racial, gender, cultural, but of course we have our science and maths, a lot of things that may pertain outside of the things that are visible for us. But what words or phrases come to mind when you think of identity? Maybe one word or phrase, definitely drop it in the chat for me. Elliot says, as a non-binary person, I would argue that gender isn't always visible. I agree. I'm going to get into that actually. So yes, Elliot, I'm 100%. I got you. We're going to get into it. We're definitely going to get into it. Yeah, there's difference in gender expression and gender identity. I 100% agree. Leslie, also sometimes how someone presents themselves is how they want to be perceived rather than their actual identity, like wealth. I 100% agree. See, we're already off to a great discussion. Anyone have any words or phrases for identity in the chat? I'm just checking our chat here. I'm also checking our time. Okay. So let's go into it. I like to use this visual. I'm sorry that the one on my left, I'm also hoping on your left as well, maybe some people's right, is a little small. I'm sorry for that. But what it is showing, it's showing this kind of wheel of personality and how that personality shapes and forms our identities. So for example, in the center here, maybe this lilac lavender color, it could be something, another color for someone else. We have race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, sex, age, and wow, maybe I do need glasses. I was telling my mom the other day, no, I'm fine. Marital and physical ability, mental and physical ability, as well as gender identity or expression. So definitely what Elliot was talking about in the chat, as well as Michael. So we're going to get into that for sure. Elliot says, another term that I've become familiar with recently is gender attribution. That is the assumption of gender that the other person put on you, that another person put on you. Yes, we're going to get into all of that. I love this already. So I'm going to use the one on the right since I can see that a lot better, and hopefully you all can as well. So this is just kind of showcasing how different things can be broken up. So they have the core center of this wheel and then things surrounding it. So we have, again, similar to the ones on the other side, but then if we look outside, we have things like our work background, are we a smoker or non-smoker, our parental status, our geographic location, our thinking styles, our learning styles. And a lot of these things outside could be invisible, depending on, of course, many different factors, such as what we display in ourselves, what we choose to share with ourselves, what we choose to express to other people, how other people may perceive those levels or identities that are being expressed. So it definitely depends on a lot of different factors. But for some identities, I feel like there are a lot of different conversations around, for example, these three categories of terms that I'm about to talk about. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of these conversations tend to use these terms interchangeably. And I will tell you now, they are not interchangeable. Nope, 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 nope. Yes, you may see it sometimes on government documents or files or forms, but if we are talking about communities of people, a lot of these terms do have their own distinct definitions, and we're going to get into that. So first, we're going to start with race and ethnicity. Especially in the current climate that we're in the United States, there's been a lot of conversations around race and ethnicity, especially diversity, inclusion, and equity. That isn't only about race and ethnicity, but that is a good chunk of the conversation in most institutions. So I'm going to go with race and then go over to my, let's do it that way, go over to my right and talk about ethnicity. So race. So race is typically an umbrella term. It's usually used to describe a specific physical characteristic or a specific geographic location that a group commonly would share. So for example, I identify as Black, that is my race. That means anyone else that would identify as Black means that they have some sort of descendant or lineage related to the African continent in some way, shape, or form. Also, it's usually associated with things like skin color, especially in the United States, which I will get into why race is not always a good indicator of certain individuals, but we'll get into that too. Also, it is socially constructed. So for example, the concept of whiteness that I want to highlight here didn't become a legal term in the United States until 1681. A little history behind this was during this time, there was 1676 when Bacon's Rebellion happened. Bacon's Rebellion happened in Virginia, and it was when a combination, it was led by Nathaniel Bacon, was a combination of white Americans, mainly many of them were poor, did not own any land. White Americans, white indentured servants as well was a part of this, as well as Black indentured servants and Black slaves rose up against the kind of commonwealth that was in Virginia to try to get more, not only legal representation, but also get more visibility in the things they wanted to be done. A huge issue at that moment was Native American presence in their colonies, which is a whole other conversation we can talk about. But after the Bacon Rebellion, a lot of white landowners felt that this connection between Black indentured servants and Black slaves and white indentured servants and white non-owning individuals was too strong. So what they want to do is they want to divide and conquer. We hear that a lot. So they devised policy that stated that a person that is white will not be subjected to slavery, whereas a person that is Black, they are hereditarily slaves. So that already gave the hierarchy its structure. On top of that, they also started introducing more slaves into Virginia. The first slaves settled in Virginia in 1619. So around this time, they were introducing more slaves and replacing their indentured servants. So there was no longer that gray area of freedom, if we want to call it that. On top of that, they also wanted to enact this law and policy to also get rid of multiracial or biracial mixed marriages. So the idea of someone that was white marrying a non-white person was something that they didn't want to do, especially introducing slavery. That would mean that depending on who that person's mother was, it would decide whether or not they would be enslaved. So that was another reason why this law came into existence, and whiteness became what it is today and is shaped and formed since then. But with race, I did mention the social construct, and it truly is. Now, when I say social construct, I do not mean that it's not real. Things are very much real if they're socially constructed. For example, marriage is a social construct, but it's very much real. There are legal documents, there are unions, there are ceremonies. I would never say that it wasn't real, but it was human made. Same with race and ethnicity. Race, there is no biological affiliation, at least genetically, to us being linked in the categories that we describe today. And we know this because these categories have changed throughout history. They have not been the same since 1681 or before that or after. So when it comes to race, it is a complicated conversation to talk about because many people have many different definitions and views of race. Some people see terms like African American as a race, and it's not, it's an ethnicity. I'm going to get into that for a second. Some people see terms like Latin and Hispanic as a race. And for some people, that is how they identify racially, but it is an ethnic identity. So there definitely are a lot of different moving parts to it. And I'm not going to stop the conversation here. This is only the tip of the iceberg. But let's move over to ethnicity. Ethnicity, it falls under the broader category of race. So think of it as an umbrella. So your umbrella is race. Underneath that is your different ethnicities. So with that in mind, ethnicity typically includes a lot of different things that race doesn't always include because it's such a broad term. So if you're ethnically a part of a specific community, you're usually sharing, but not always, sharing a similar culture or a similar country of origin or history, a possible religious affiliation, maybe similar clothing and cuisine patterns. You are typically sharing those specific elements of your community. So with that in mind, it's also something that is not really prioritized in the United States. We tend to have conversations about race. Ethnicity tends to be lumped within it, but we're not really just talking about ethnicity on its own. And that's definitely something I noticed in Vietnam when I was there, because in Vietnam, they recognize over 56 ethnic groups. Of course, racially, they are all Asian, but depending on what ethnic group you fall in, that does determine how you are treated in Vietnamese society. Whereas in the United States, you can be of a certain ethnicity, and depending on your race, that seems to be the bigger factor for many different scenarios. Again, not always, but many of them. But for example, I'll give you an example of race and ethnicity, and also an Italian nationality here, because some people do seem to confuse nationality with ethnicity or race. So I'll use me as an example. As I mentioned before, my race is Black. I identify as Black. My ethnicity, since my family is from Jamaica, I identify with the Jamaican ancestry. So my ethnicity is Jamaican, because Jamaicans do have a separate ancestry, culture, and just general history than other Caribbean islands. And then nationally, I would identify myself as American since I was born and raised here. So of course, 3 different identities. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. Of course, there are some people where their identities do overlap. If you were born in Italy and you were raised in Italy and you identify with Italian culture, then your race could be anything. Personally, it really depends. But if you have family from many decades in Italy, then maybe your race could be white. And then ethnically, you would be Italian, and nationally, you would be Italian. So it really depends on all of these different moving parts. But with these 2 terms in mind, they are not the same. So moving on, I want to show another perspective of race ethnicity, because I acknowledge that I'm only providing one, and there are way more perspectives on it than I could possibly provide. And just, of course, this session as well, this could be a whole conversation for a whole other time. But essentially what I want to do is I want to kind of break it down with this picture here. So we have, again, race, our big bubble, ethnicity within it, nationality within that, heritage and culture. So why I want to break this down is because sometimes when we talk about race, it could be very broad. But for example, when we talk about being Black in America, there are also Black immigrants. There are also Black individuals that aren't descended from the individuals that were brought here in the 1600s and before. So it's definitely a conversation of how well can we address and talk to these communities if we know where they're from and their history behind certain things. Because for example, if you are a Black person from Nigeria, you may not view certain things the same way as a Black person from, let's say, Chicago. And that's because there's so many different cultural elements that go into that. Us just being Black does not mean that we are going to agree with everything. And that's the myth of the monolith, this idea that because you're a part of a certain group, then you almost think the same way, do the same things, have the same ideas. And that's not true for any human group, especially if you go from these broad categories like race. So going down, we have our surface, conscious, and collective subconscious, and that gets into our culture, which we're going to talk about a little bit when we talk about values and beliefs. So moving on here. And also, if you have any questions, please just let me know. I am just trying to cover these in the broadest way possible, but I understand that it could be definitely very complicated. I'm actually going to get into Latin America very soon. So, sex and gender. So, sex and gender are not the same thing. Again, they are often interchanged, especially in a lot of different professional documents, but they are very different. So, this idea of certain gender roles, for example, being biological or ingrained, is not true. You'll hear it maybe in like something like evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology, trying to explain why certain gender roles exist within certain cultures. But the reason why it cannot be explained, at least in this broad scope of biology, is because it varies widely and it varies through history and it varies from group to group. So, for example, there are many things that are practiced culturally in certain areas, such as the United States, that have changed across history, across time, across existence. Someone mentioned gender expression. Gender expression has, of course, transformed throughout human history. And even within the last 250 years, I was arguing with someone in the YouTube comments, as I do, I need to stop doing that. And they were trying to explain to me something about femininity. They were trying to explain that femininity is this more like this biological fixed thing. And these are these characteristics that make up femininity. And I had to shut it down, of course. I had to explain how none of that was true. But in this aspect of identifying ourselves in gender expression, it really is based on, of course, two things. One, how that person wants to share and express their gender identity. So there are certain things like, for example, I will wear if I want to perceive or be perceived as more feminine. Maybe there are certain things that I will wear that I want to be perceived as more masculine. Or maybe I will wear something completely out of that binary, because gender is not a binary, and we will get into that too. So getting into sex and gender, I show that this is culturally influenced. There really is little to no universality between certain things. Like, for example, there are certain groups where the men take care of the children. There are certain groups where the women work and hunt and gather. There are matriarchies. They're not very common, but they exist. So I'm going to show you this right here. This is a PBS map. And again, this will be linked in the PowerPoint of a gender map of the world. So these are different parts of the world that recognize and acknowledge more than just the binary man and woman gender identities. So for example, I will click here. I'm looking for a specific one. Actually, let's go here. I'll click in Tonga. So this idea, and of course, I definitely encourage you to look through this on your own and see the differences in all of these different things that go on and how different people identify. This idea of a third gender is something that is sometimes very much acknowledged and embraced in other cultures. It may be new for some people, especially in the United States, but this is not something that was recently invented or recently decided on. This has always existed. It's just getting more presence and representation across a lot of different areas. So definitely encourage you to look at it. There's usually pictures. There you go. There are usually pictures that are available, and you can also look at these communities a lot more on your own. But let me get back here. It is definitely something I 100% encourage you all to look at. So sex and gender. What am I talking about? So with sex, typically people view sex as a biological. So this idea of male, female, and intersex. Intersex are individuals that may be born with more than one sex characteristic. So for example, they can have XXY chromosomes. That's our Klinefelter syndrome individuals. Intersex individuals can have a combination of multiple different things, like multiple different, for example, internal and external genitalia. That could actually affect the way that they are able to, like, for example, especially with intersex individuals, which could be another conversation on its own. There are some people that when you're born, there are certain things that you can see and notice that would be identified as intersex, or there are certain things that some people don't know until they're older. I had a professor at my university who was intersex, and she did not know that until she was a lot older, until they did a scan and found out that she had internal testes, and she just didn't know. And there are sometimes situations like that where, again, it didn't affect her. She was able to have children that she wanted to have, so it didn't affect her reproductive system. But there are certain times where individuals may not know or may not be aware of being intersex. Also because I think most people don't really know that this category exists. So I think it's something that definitely should be talked about more. So again, within your sex, we have this binary male and female. Intersex is also included with that as well. We have our chromosomal makeup. We have our sex organs, our secondary sex characteristics, and we have our hormone levels. Again, all of these can be different, even within male and female categories, or of course beyond it, like with our intersex individuals. Gender, on the other hand, is a socially constructed term. And again, back to the map that we saw, you see that there's a lot of different gender identities that have been recorded and traced all across the world. So we have, at least in the United States, we have man, woman, we have our non-binary, we have our transgender individuals, we have a lot of different categories than just the binary that a lot of us have maybe either seen or have maybe grown up with. There is more to it than that. This idea of masculinity and femininity, or this idea of basically just being beyond that binary. So this idea of we do not need to fit ourselves into this one specific category. We can do what makes us feel like our authentic selves, and that doesn't have to rely on the specific precepts that we were given growing up or the precepts that society may impose on us. Then we have our gender non-conforming individuals, and individuals that, again, this binary does not need to apply. This binary is something that is it's not going to do. This binary is something that is not relevant to how they want to identify themselves. And as someone mentioned before, let me go back to the chat because I know that it was definitely mentioned. I know that Elliot mentioned gender attribution. So this idea that someone outside of who you are in your community and perspective will place an identity on you based on how they perceive you. There's definitely a lot of different elements when it comes to gender expression, gender performance, and a lot of that does come into play with the dominant society or culture and what they view it and what they deem it as and how they would define it. But it's very important that we define it for ourselves as well. So going into it, so I did mention my pronouns earlier and why I think pronouns are important. I'm not affiliated with either group here, but essentially it is important because I feel like it allows us to not make assumptions and allows us to understand and respect other individuals and how they identify themselves. I think it's very important, especially in this last 10, 20 years, that we are identifying ourselves and giving ourselves that voice that can be amplified. So it's also something that encourages people to talk about their gender, something that I think a lot of people just assume instead of really thinking about and feeling how they might relate to or fit into something that they may have grown up in. Another thing too is that it ensures that everyone gets pronouns right. We don't want to give someone an inaccurate pronoun descriptor. We want to make sure that we are identifying people how they identify themselves. And just here's a list of all the different pronouns. Of course, there's more than this, but all the different pronouns that exist and how to utilize them within a sentence. So moving on from that, this video will talk about Latinx and Hispanic. And I'm just going to make sure that while I'm sharing my screen, that we have everything up and loaded. All right, going back. So Latinx and Hispanic, I will load this up first.
I'm going to ask you, do you know what the difference between Latina or Hispanic and Spanish is?
Between Latina, Hispanic, and Spanish.
I'm gonna have to say where they live.
Okay, so like geographic.
I mean, they're just different ethnicities. I mean, between Mexican to Latin America to European.
That was confusing. The general public and the media use both of these terms interchangeably, but there is a slight difference. Hispanic is a term that refers to Spanish-speaking origin or ancestry. Latino is a more
Sorry about that. Just want to make sure that we can see the closed captions.
frequently used term which refers to origin or ancestry to Latin America.
Does Latina mean someone who speaks Spanish? Because in the case of Brazilian, who speak Portuguese.
Hispanic is basically based on whether you or your family speak the language of Spanish, whereas Latino is focusing more on geographic location, that being Latin America. So unlike Hispanic, Latino includes Brazilians but excludes Spaniards.
I hate when people call me Spanish because I'm not.
Okay.
You're Spanish because you're from Spain.
Spanish is from Spain, like
Yes!
conquistador, type thing. Europe. I know a lot of people when they enter somewhere, they hear someone speak Spanish, like, oh, they're Spanish, and I'm like, no, they spoke Spanish too. Yeah, that does not mean that they're from Spain.
For starters, Spanish describes someone who comes from Spain. It's a term of nationality, but it's also a language. Think of Italian. It's a language, but it's also a nationality. Which one is Latina? ¿Por qué no es Latina?
Por el semblante de la cara.
Semblante que tiene más African features.
No se ve latina, no se ve hispana. Like, she looks black.
Can you be black and be Latina?
I believe so, but some people of, Latin descent are like, no, we're different.
Those are the ones that have been colonized.
I'm not even gonna disagree with you there.
I think they all could be Latina. I feel like they could all be Hispanic. I mean, they all could be Spanish too. You don't know.
Yes! Perfect! You can't really tell just by a person's face whether they're Latino, Hispanic, or Spanish. Because many Latin American countries, like those of my parents, Colombia and Peru, were colonized by Spain, many folks don't feel the need or want to identify with a term that indicates them belonging to Spain. Maybe think of it this way. Hispanic, a sense of community through a connection to Spain. Latino, a sense of community through a history of colonization from Spain. Colonization isn't something that we just read about in our textbooks. We feel the effects of centuries of colonization today through lost history, erasure of native and African languages, faith practices, basically our culture. So it's no wonder why so many folks just don't want to identify with the term Hispanic. That doesn't mean that Latino doesn't have any remnants of Spanish colonialism. I mean, Latino and Latina is supposed to describe folks from Latin America, but the term Latin America only came to be after European Spanish imperialism. It's important to remember that none of these forms of identity are perfect. And that's because they're socially constructed and mostly only used in the US. They also lead people to assume that Latino or Hispanic is a race, when that's not true. Which is why so many Latinos with African ancestry have begun to use the term Afro-Latina. As for me, well, until a term that comes around that fully encompasses and embraces both the indigenous and African influences of Latin America, I'm gonna stick to identifying as an indigenous Latina. How do you identify? How do you feel about the terms Latina, Hispanic, and Spanish?
I did not mean to cut her off at the end there, but I'm going to go back to our slide that we were just on. But yeah, I think this is a great overview of these three identities and how they don't always overlap. And when they do, of course, they can mean so many different things to so many different people. We talked about skin color and how that isn't always the best indicator of someone's community. For example, when I was in Vietnam, there were people that were almost as dark as me, but of course, we wouldn't identify the same way racially or ethnically. So it isn't always just how someone looks, but how they identify themselves. And of course, understanding that that can be done in many different ways. So I know that I'm getting cramped on time. So let me continue forward here. And now that we've talked about it, let's go back. Now that we've talked about it, let's get into intersectionality. You think it will let me increase our screen? It's okay. We'll come back to it. So let's talk about intersectionality. So we see all these different communities, we see all these different groups, and I do want to say that they are not distant, they are not disconnected, they are connected to one another. Intersectionality, the term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, and it essentially talks about this idea of these different groups do affect one another, and these different groups do impact how we see and perceive things in the world around us. So for example, I'm not just Black and a cisgendered woman, cisgender meaning that I identify with the sex I was assigned at birth, which is female. It also means that as a Black woman, there are certain things that are unique to my perspective in my life that should be addressed, should be talked about, should be communicated if someone wants to know more about my lived experience. So intersectionality is very important. And because of that, I actually want us to talk about it a little bit more. So with intersectionality, of course, Kimberly Crenshaw used it as a way of pinpointing specific discrimination that people may face, oppression or domination that certain groups may face within not just the sphere of one lens, but multiple. But I'm actually excited for us to we talked about identity. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. There was a lot that I covered in that time because I want to get to the more conversational aspect of our presentation here. But if you want to look at this, and we're going to scrap it for the sake of time. What I had here was an identity wheel. I wanted all of us to take some time, maybe pen and paper on your phone, to fill out how you identify within these different categories. And then if we have the time, we could talk about the identities you think of the most, the identities you think of the least, and the ones that you want to learn more about. Because I think it's important that we're able to identify ourselves so that we understand how our identities impact ourselves and the world around us and the communities that we're in. So I definitely wanted to give that a go. I'm going to do this again so we're full screen. But sadly, we will get to the other two activities that we have. I will start talking less and less, I promise you. So let me go back just a little bit. So solidifying selfhood. So what we have to do, so after we've thought of our identities, and maybe we can take a minute to kind of think about some of those identities that we may have. Again, I can go back to this paper and we can kind of take a quick peek. So how do you identify maybe religiously or spiritually, racially, ethnically, your socioeconomic status, your gender, your sex, your age, your sexual orientation, which is different from gender and sex. They do not all align. Your national origin, your first language, and of course, your ability levels. And take some time to think about it for yourself. And just more importantly, what identities do you not think about most when you think of yourself? Maybe you don't think about your age as much, or maybe you don't think about your national origin as much. Maybe it's just something that you don't usually consider. Okay, just checking our chat here and also checking our time. All right, so I'm going to quickly go into the difference between values and identity. So I'll start with values. And there are links embedded here. There are links actually embedded throughout the chat. Some of them I will click on, some of them I will not, because if you want to explore more, I do give you the opportunity to do that through the sources that I've gathered, but the idea for values, right? So I'm going to read it word for word because this is from a specific source, Ethics Age. It is the basic and fundamental beliefs that guide or motivate attitudes or actions. They help us to determine what is important to us. So that is our values. So for example, maybe we value authenticity, or we value security, or we value respect. Then we go into identity. So identity, and this is from the right questions. It says our decisions and actions flow from our principles. And in this way, our values help to define us. They are part of our identity. So our values are a part of our identities. For example, you might identify as a student or an immigrant, or you might identify as a older sibling, or you might identify as a coworker. So all of these shape and make who we are, even beyond just those visible identities, or those identities that people may see us or perceive to see from us. So then we have values and service. So external and internal. So I would love to get some words going that aren't from just me. So I would love for these two questions kind of be reflected on. You can either type your answers in the chat, or we can have someone raise their hand and unmute themselves. But if we're looking externally, how would a community or organization's values impact volunteers? Maybe you're a volunteer yourself, so maybe a first experience, or maybe you are a supervisor or a coworker or a leader, and you want to know how that would impact the volunteers you're currently working with. And then also internally, how do volunteers' values impact their integration into a community during service? If values align, then it's going to work well. But what if values don't align? How would that impact how some people are seen? I'll keep my chat box open here. Okay, someone says an organization's values can help a volunteer identify the right fit for them. Absolutely true. Thank you, Larissa. Now, I know that for this internal aspect here, from my perspective, how do volunteers' values impact their integration into a community during service? There might be certain things that a volunteer might see or notice that might make them question their values. Maybe they came in with a specific set of values, and then after integrating or being a part of a community that may do things differently, maybe it makes them question their own. Maybe they think, should I perceive this the same way still, knowing what I know now? Or should I maybe change the way that I thought about that before? I think that's definitely a common thing that happens to most of us, even outside of service. Joan says a volunteer experience may help the org to understand. Very true. I think there's a lot to learn from both directions, volunteer, staff, and volunteer. I agree. Thank you everybody for sharing with that. And of course, everyone that has shared so far. So I'm actually going to go to our lovely whiteboard here. Give me 1 second. So this is an activity I'm very excited for, and I hope that we can all do it together. So let me stop sharing my screen and let me share in a new way. We're going to go to the whiteboard. So I don't know how many of you have used the whiteboard before, but essentially what it is, I'm going to draw a lovely tree. Don't mind my artistic abilities. My brother took all of it. So I'm going to draw this interesting lollipop tree that you may have seen many, many times in life. Okay, so I'm going to keep that here. And essentially what I want to do for this tree, so I'm going to pause this for a second. And essentially what I want to do with this tree is I want us to create, and let me go back here for a second. I want us to create, based on this tree, the perfect volunteer. So I'm going to fill it in. And this perfect volunteer could be anything you want it to be. It could be for the current role that you're either part of or in, or the ideas that you hope for yourself as a volunteer. And for this tree, I'm going to go down and get my little notes. Don't mind me. I'm going to write next to the roots, I am, next to the trunk, I can, and next to the branch leaves, I believe. So let me go back and do that. So let me resume here. And I'm going to use our text feature. And here, I can, that's going to be there. Then we want, oh, let's make it a little bit easier to read for everyone. I can, okay. Then in this section, we want our I am. And lastly, in this section, we want our I believe. Okay. So here, I would love, if possible, for all of you, I think you all are able to interact with this whiteboard. So for example, if you go to the option here, if you're in the share screen portion, there's an option to annotate. And I think it's after those three little dots that say more for some of you. There's an option to annotate. And in here, you can click a text box or write in what would be the perfect volunteer for you based on what they can do, who they are, and what they might believe. So we'll take a few minutes to do this. Yes, yes, Lisa has said, based on our conversation about internal and external values, that there have been a few volunteers in the past that have left because their internal values were narrower than the agency's. That happens. That definitely does happen. Thank you for sharing that. Let me know if anyone needs help with finding that annotate feature. And just, yep, there we go. I'm going to expand this full screen so I can see it too. Okay, so I can work as part of a team. Yes, definitely crucial throughout all of life. I am flexible. Yes, perfect. Flexible. Oh, we love it. We love it. I believe in helping others. Yes. Thinking of our ideal volunteer, or even just thinking of ourselves. What do we want to see? I am empathetic. Very important. I'm glad it's working for some people. That's great. I'm knowledgeable. Yes. Knowledgeable and flexibility. I believe I'm valued. Oh, so crucial. So crucial. I'm responsible. Yes. I believe my work makes a difference. That is very true. That internal motivation is 100% needed. I believe in empowering others. Yes. I believe in your mission. Yes. I'll wait just a few more seconds to get a few more down. And also, if you ever want to save this tree, there is a little save icon right there at the top that will save this as a picture for all of you. I can do anything. Love it. Yes, so this tree, based on all of our different inputs and all of our different ideas, I can be adaptable. Perfect. This tree shapes what we want to see in volunteers and hopefully what we want to see in ourselves. But yes, this is why I want to do this activity is I think it shows how many of us actually, when it comes to the I can, I am, I believe, it shows how many of us maybe have similarities in what we're all hoping to achieve, even if we're not working in the same sector or the same field or the same area of interest. There is some overlap in what we hope to have in a volunteer or in a service partner. Was there any part of this tree that was difficult for some people to find something for? Like maybe the I believe statement or the I can statement. I'll keep an eye on the chat here, just to make sure. I can continue to learn and develop. Perfect. Just make sure I'm not missing anybody here. But there are definitely elements to this that could be really difficult. Like maybe we know what we can do, but maybe it's hard for us to think about who we are. And I'm going to save this tree for myself. And I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Thank you for everybody that participated, that was able to add to this. I think this is a wonderful aspect of having this on Zoom is that we're able to do this. Of course, in person, we could do it all the same, but it's definitely great to have some of you include your thoughts and actions along in this process. So let me stop sharing. Let me check our chat really quickly. Oh yeah, Zoom does, yeah, right. Isn't it super cool? Yeah, I saw it at another meeting. This is not my own idea. I saw it at another meeting. I'm like, I need this. So I co-opted it a little bit. I adapted it. Let me share our screen again and go back. We're heading off and we're gonna go out to our breakout room soon because we are losing time and I do not want that to be the part that we're sacrificing here. So let's go back. I'm gonna share my screen. Let's go to our third aspect of this. So syncing to our service. So we already know what we want to see in a volunteer. We already know who, based on what we talked about, how we perceive ourselves and the identities that we hold. Let's combine them all together. So how do our identities affect our service? There are many different parts of our identities, some that we may think of more than others, that really do affect how we are seen or interact in a community, either one that we grew up in or one that we're new to. So in this version, there is an AmeriCorps aspect, and let me make sure I have shared this with all of you with my audio and visuals. Okay, brilliant. We're gonna watch a short video on an AmeriCorps member. So I'm an AmeriCorps member for VISTA, Volunteer Service to America. This is an AmeriCorps member in City Year. Actually, my brother's an AmeriCorps member for City Year. So we're gonna watch this AmeriCorps member's perspective on their service.
Growing up, I did pretty well. I got good grades. But when I got to college, I realized that I was really far behind. Thinking about it now, let's say if I have this role model who looks like me and I can relate to in the classroom, I think that would have been a big help for me. So I want to be there so I can help those students get to where they need to be. My name is Byron Flores, and I'm serving at MS302 in the South Bronx. What made me want to serve in the neighborhood I grew up was the culture. Serving in the Bronx, I can relate more to the students, and the students can relate more to me. City Year came up. They were doing a recruiting event at my school. I checked it out, and I liked the fact that they're there from the time that the kids come in to the time that they leave. And I really wanted to work with kids in a place where I take charge. Teachers have 30 kids, and there's only one of them. But when you're in there, you get to address the kids who are not engaged, have their head down, and you get to come up with creative ways to engage them in the lesson. It's challenging, but at the same time, it's rewarding. One of my favorite students is Gideon. He came from Africa, and he has a lot of trouble with English. He feels kind of left out, and often he shuts down when he can't do the English work. So I've been working with Gideon since day one. Gideon is the type of kid who has a lot of enthusiasm, and he brings joy to the whole team. Like, just seeing Gideon smile, it brightens up everyone's day. He comes to school before us. Gideon is here in front of the school waiting for me, and we'll sit outside and do the homework. I'm more like a role model now, someone who's there outside of the school setting, someone who he can talk to. Gideon has gained an immense amount of confidence. He tries his hardest to get his ideas out. He went from not being able to write a sentence to be able to write whole paragraphs on his own. Owning your leadership skills while being in City Year and actually getting to see how your leadership skills affect other people can give you confidence. And that confidence carries on into your job, your relationships, it carries on into everything you do in life. I realized through City Year that changing one student, it makes a difference. I feel like if I weren't there, Gideon would still be the kid in the back of the class with his head down and not getting the attention that he deserves. Just by instilling confidence in him to be able to even try English, I feel like I made a difference in him. The red jacket is powerful, and I've realized it by just walking down the street. People respect you. People know who you are. People know what you do. When they see someone who's actually gone out and seen the world, they notice that someone from the South Bronx has a fair chance.
And I will end it here, just for the sake of some time that we can do some of that reflecting together. So I did have a few discussion questions, and feel free to drop them in the chat if you would like to. But from a community perspective, based on what we just saw, how may the community see a volunteer who's from the area? From the volunteer perspective, how many volunteers need to adjust to their role in the community, whether they're from there or whether they're from elsewhere? Lastly, the organization perspective, how can the organization support volunteers who might be new or unfamiliar with the community they are serving in? Just a shout out, AmeriCorps City Year does have a placement in Manchester, but also the program I'm in, AmeriCorps Vista, we also are recruiting people, and we would love to have more people join our team. So just a little plug for AmeriCorps here. Okay, now we're going to go into our breakout sessions. Yay, we hopefully have enough time for this. We can probably condense it depending on how many people are here. And instead of 10 minutes, maybe we can make it closer to 8 minutes. And essentially, this was originally going to be 5 groups, but actually we'll still keep it as 5 groups, but we'll just be less people in each group, which is even better. So what we're going to do for the breakout session is I want you to pick a word or phrase on the slide. Just kind of pick a word, keep it with you, one that really stands out to you. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And I now want all of us to go into our respective breakout rooms with your word, and the instructions should be there with you. What you're going to do is you're going to explain why the word that you chose is something that can either be supported by the service that's being done or by the organization that's doing it, or why you think it should be addressed or acknowledged more.
Bring them back.
Thank you. Perfect. Rain's coming on in, coming back. Hello, everybody. How was the discussion? Was it good?
30 seconds left.
Some more people. Hello, 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 everybody. While everyone is trickling in again, I will share our screen because we got a few minutes left, but while everyone is coming on in, I do want to talk about why this is important.
Thinking about the other people.
Oh, you're totally fine. This is actually perfect. We're actually going to have conversations. I would love to, let me stop sharing my screen, actually hear from all of you. How was that for you? What were some things that you talked about in your groups, your individual sections?
Well, Michaela and I had 2 different words that were very different. Mine was age, hers was gender, and I learned a lot from her on what she categorizes as gender. It's not just sexual preferences. So that was very interesting. Sorry, dog. And we didn't get to talk long enough. I wish I could listen to Michaela a lot longer because she's very interested and very knowledgeable about what I don't know about the whole movement. So that was really nice.
Yes, Melody, thank you so much. I would have made these longer, but with time not being on our side, I'm sorry to cut the conversation short. But yes, I love that that exchange was happening for both of you. I would love to continue onward just at this moment in time. Let me share my screen and get to our why, and then close it off. So why was this important? Why was all this important? Of course, we all have our different ideas for why it was important, but one is for that self-reflection piece. If we know why these things are important to other people, then we will know why they're important to ourselves and how to better advocate for ourselves and better explain and have conversations about things that are important to us. So I think that's very important. Connections too, this will help us build connections, mainly in places that we maybe didn't think otherwise. And of course, visibility. We want to make sure that a lot of groups and communities, especially now that we are given the opportunity to identify ourselves and be heard and acknowledged for it, we want to make sure that that is amplified and uplifted, and we can have these conversations and people will be comfortable sharing in them. So I did have a few questions, but sorry, we're going to have to skip those. But any questions for me or any comments, actually, I will actually stop sharing my screen again so I can see all of you. And just anything that you would like to talk about in these last minute.
Oh, I just wanted to thank you. This was very informational and I really enjoyed it. So thank you, Arya.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I stumbled over a few things. I didn't explain things as well as I wanted to sometimes, but thank you for listening. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you all. Oh, so kind. Let me share one more time to kind of get that final wrap up going for all of us. So quick quote from Audre Lorde: "It is not our differences that divide us, it is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." So keeping those ideas with us as we go on. So there are going to be links that are shared or already shared in the box here that you can have access to the PowerPoint that I just presented, all the resources within that, and hopefully you can share it with other people. I would love to keep this conversation going. Last but not least, thank you, everybody. If you want to stay connected with me, here's my email, here's my LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. And please reach out to me for anything at all. I enjoyed being here. And thank you for the Governor's Conference in Volunteerism for New Hampshire. I'm very fortunate to be able to share with all of you. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Arya, for being with us today. And of course, you said your contact information was in the chat box. And just a really quick reminder, I hope you all will stick around for just another minute. The recording of this session and slides will be shared at volunteernewhampshire.org, and we'll send you an email when they're posted. So just be sure to check your safe senders list for info@volunteernewhampshire.org so that you won't miss any of the information. We have one more remaining Governor Conference session. We'll have a trivia contest and reflection opportunity tomorrow during the lunch hour, so please check that out. In the chat, you'll see a link where you can tell us your thoughts on this session and any others that you share or that you attend. You can come back to the survey multiple times or wait until the end of the conference. The link is the same either way. If you fill out the survey by May 31st, you'll be entered into a drawing to win a prize. And there's another chance to win. You can submit an intent to nominate form for the 2021 Spirit of New Hampshire Awards. This is your opportunity to recognize an outstanding volunteer, group of volunteers, or an organization that champions volunteerism. And just to be clear, filling out this form does not count for nominating, but Volunteer New Hampshire will reach out to you once they begin accepting nominations. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day, the rest of your day.